So we come now to key concept 5.4, which is about global migration. And it's connecting the Industrial Revolution and imperialism, earlier key concepts of this time period, and connecting them to show how does this affect individuals and their movement around the world. There's certainly a pattern of immigration, which you hear about in U.S. history, which is actually going on around the globe in this migration pattern. The first reason is definitely industrialization, as AP identifies in point number one, that it was influenced by both industrial factors at home in certain countries and unindustrialized countries searching for some of the opportunities found there. So, what are some of the causes kind of in line with that point number one? Moving forward, maybe. Okay, cause number one is increased population. So, thanks to increased agricultural techniques, which we've looked at before from industrialization and the industrialization of agriculture, changes in crop rotation, changes in seed drill, there is now an increased population. This is particularly impacts Asia. Most notably, if you look at kind of the numbers there. But if you notice, even with this diagram, they're all going up at about the same slope. And so there is a general increase around the world of the population. The other reason for this is medicine. Industrialization spurs on scientific discovery. And part of that scientific discovery is in medicine, biology, and the spreading of that medicine to other places. This also impacts, of course, life expectancy, which is going to cause population to increase. It's going to allow childbirth to be more successful and women to die less in childbirth, in addition to dealing with certain diseases that people would contract and die at young ages of. Furthermore, the Industrial Revolution was both the cause of this increased medicine and also the need for it, because the Industrial Revolution had almost invented multiple diseases coming out of this hard environment where they're living in either the coal mines or the factories, and there's certain conditions that are coming that are now being studied by doctors in new ways, and the changes in those ways actually also increase the population. Other reasons are what we would call more of the push factors, the things happening at home for the migrants who are leaving that might also be encourage them to leave. The first would be famine. We see this particularly in Ireland with the Irish potato famine, but other places around the world, even including India later on in the 1800s, will want to migrate thanks to famine at home. Political instability. You see this especially in European powers like Germany, who are unifying during this time, who aren't enjoying some of that political stability. And so the political instability encourages them to leave and find a place that is already established and a place where they can settle as a family. And then there's also just the economic opportunity, more of a pull factor to other countries. So if you are in an area that's less industrialized, moving and migrating to an area that is industrialized would benefit you economically. And you see that with the English, particularly coming to America. So here's an example of 3 reasons why people came to the United States of America, but also to other places in the Americas, including Argentina. The political instability, which we just mentioned, and the economic opportunity did lead some to come and settle almost as a colonial experience and yet not. So there's always these settler colonies in places like Argentina, which are their own countries. They've just declared independence thanks to Simon Bolivar and Jose de San Martin. They're already independent and therefore stable enough to invite these large crowds of migrants, in this case, particularly from Italy, coming to places like Argentina. Finally, the Industrial Revolution also caused new transportation. So you have new ways of getting places, which both enables people to go on migration and then secondly, also enables people to have something to do when they come there. For example, the Chinese migrants were, which we'll talk about in just a second, but they're coming to help many of them with advancing this technology through railroads and building track, etc. So this is a means as well as a pull factor in the places they're going. Why do they personally go? Well, for a variety of reasons. We just mentioned settling down. Some were miners, professionals. They wanted a new opportunity. They just wanted to go someplace where their skills were not used. And so you see them settling and moving to other places. Each of the purple stars on this map are settler colonies, mostly by English settlers moving to places that were part of the British Empire at the time, but not exclusively. You see the Italians going to Argentina, you see others moving to British colonies and settling there. So reasons for going in that case are more for their own economic opportunity. Others went for more of a manual labor, farmers, factory workers. Many of these were the Irish and the Italians, kind of the more struggling workers who left their home country because they weren't rich there and they were struggling as it was. And so they often would go to an established country that's industrializing, such as the United States, where they're able then to economically prosper and have more opportunity. Furthermore, there's an interesting class during this time of merchants, particularly coming from Lebanon and Syria. So they're the merchant class coming out of almost the tradition of the Phoenicians, and they're coming to urban centers, again, established places where they can set up shops and engage in that merchant behavior. The Lebanese are also a good example because they often went back home. There was more of a back and forth migration pattern, similar to some Italians as well in New York, than the stereotypical image we have in our heads of them coming somewhere and just settling. Finally, you see a more coerced labor entering into certain places. This is an example of this are convicts going to Australia, also going to French Guiana, and those convict penal colonies, which are happening by European places that simply don't want their criminals in their country anymore. Other coerced labor came from European colonies and imperial centers. So, for example, many Chinese, thanks to British imperialism there and even American imperialism, engaged in indentured labor contracts. So it's not, they still have a say in it. That's why it's only semi-coerced, and yet basically sign their rights away in order to go someplace, work there, and then return home. This is the case of the Chinese workers on the railroad, such as the Transcontinental Railroad, as well as Indian workers who would be sent to South Africa to work in plantations and mines there, workers that would be sent from India to Suriname and would work there on the sugar plantations. The final point that AP brings up is that many of these large-scale migrations actually change social structure and culture, and it does so first by creating ethnic enclaves, social changes in the places where they're going, where they live together. Certainly see this in Chinatown, places like San Gabriel Valley in California, Chinatown in New York City, Little Italy, places where they go and they live together and celebrate their culture living in that enclave. Some of that is because of racism, and it's almost a reaction to racism. Some of it was simply because of comfort, and they had these established patterns to encourage one another and transition from their home country, so they settled together. But this also results in social changes at home. It's kind of just natural. Many of the people pictured in this picture are men. And so many migrants were men. They were going to work. Many of them returned back home. And so back home, women are changing in their role just as they need to take on more responsibility to lead the family. Furthermore, you see transplanted culture and a more cultural diversity around the place. You see this in this case, the East Indians in Trinidad, continuing even until today with a cultural celebration, for example, in the Trinidad and Tobago, where you see this Indian clothing with kind of more Caribbean style dance mixture there, and a celebration, these migrant support networks. That word is covered by for example, in Argentina with the Italian enclaves. Finally, you see a more negative reaction. You see this in the case of laws established against certain ethnicities. For example, the Chinese and the Chinese Exclusion Acts, which are a various series of those over the late 1800s into the early 1900s. Similarly, the White Australia movement in Australia, where that population is more interested in protecting, again, from the Chinese or other Asian elements who would be coming in to work in Australia and fighting against that. So two parallel movements against immigration as a result of the large-scale migration. Finally, we see certain things that, in the case of Japan, which are a little bit unusual. Japan breaks the rules, as they were doing. They were spreading to increase their imperialism. As they sent migrants, they imperialized those areas. This led to certain countries, such as the US, coming up with agreements like the Gentleman's Agreement, which would establish and keep them from going to other countries too much. But this does lead to certain negative effects, such as internment. And that's 5.4 for you.